Padhyay alarmed at the recent incidents involving EU nations scrambling fighter jets for incommunicado Indian Airlines twice in a month. The Directorate General of Civil Aviation has called a meeting of Indian Airlines this week to figure out how to prevent the recurrence of this phenomenon. DGCA chief has taken a very serious view of this and directed a review of the existing procedures. It will, in fact, consider new ways to ensure that at least one pilot in the cockpit is fully conscious at all times and responds to calls from air traffic control. Both scares over European skies are believed to have been caused as one of the pilots was taking controlled rest. Sleeping is allowed under rules, and the awake pilot did not respond to the ATC call-outs, leading to the scare. The DGCA, the aviation watchdog in India, had over 2 years ago recommended that two fully quote-unquote conscious persons should be inside the cockpit at all times. In fact, the airline regulator, as we said, is alarmed over sleeping pilots and called a meeting of airlines over this issue. And joining us this afternoon is my colleague Sumit Chaturvedi. Sumit, what does the DGCA intend to do at this review meeting? Are guidelines going to be changed? Are explanations going to be sought from these airlines?
Well, this has become quite a serious feature, especially in the last 1.5 months. Two airlines have had these incidents where, in the case of Jet Airways, the fighters were scrambled from German airspace when this particular aircraft of Jet Airways could not communicate with ATC on Cologne. So near Cologne, Germany had to scramble the fighter jets. These fighter jets had to escort this Jet Airways flight out of its airspace. That was a serious incident involving no communication with ATC, which is a serious incident in nature. The second incident happened last week when Air India flight, again flying from German airspace, could not establish contact for some time, and that's why Belgian fighters and German fighters had to scramble and escort this particular aircraft of Air India to London. So these incidents are very serious in nature, especially in the light of the terror threats which every country is facing nowadays. Keeping that in mind, the aviation regulator DGCA has called a meeting of airlines this week, which will include all Indian airlines. Majorly Jet Airways and Air India are the airlines that fly on short, long haul routes. Other airlines in India, including Indigo, SpiceJet and Go Air, they fly on short haul routes. So Jet Airways has flights till London, while Air India has flights across the globe till US, till Australia and across the globe, while Jet Airways have flights till Europe, many destinations in Europe, and some destinations in US as well. So that's why the main reason for calling this meeting is to let these airlines know that this is very serious incidents. If some kind these incidents when countries had to scramble fighter jets, well, if these incidents keep on happening, it will be serious concern for India. On the other hand, these airlines like Indigo and SpiceJet, they fly to nearby places like Thailand and in fact Dubai and Singapore, but still they can go through these kind of times when they are incommunicado for hours and hours together. So these incidents are serious in nature, and that's why aviation regulator has called a meeting of these airlines this week.
Right, joining us is retired Air Marshal P.S. Ahluwalia. Sir, I understand that controlled rest is part of aviation rules and safety guidelines. So what were these pilots or these airlines doing differently or wrong, which has worried the aviation watchdog? We'll try and reconnect with Air Marshal Ahluwalia in just a bit. But Sumit, if I could come to you on this, what is the SOP for airlines internationally when it comes to long flights, when pilots do take controlled rest?
Palki, controlled rest is allowed, definitely. This is part of the rest which is allowed for pilots. But at one point of time, one pilot should be properly, and we can say that he has to be very much aware of the things that are happening around him. That's why there are two pilots in a cockpit and not one. Well, this is global procedure everywhere that the pilots are given controlled rest, but one air pilot has to be in a conscious state of his mind at all times, which is very much required for the safety of the aircraft. Though if we describe the procedure, as soon as the airline or aircraft takes off from the place, they go on autopilot mode, which is very much required in international airspace. But at that moment, the pilot should be very much in the control of aircraft at all times, because anything can happen at any point of time. So this allows the other pilot to go for some kind of, we can say, that controlled rest, which is allowed very much. There is a scheduled time for sleeping as well, but the other pilot has to be in his right senses at all time. They cannot consume alcohol. They have to be in their right senses. In fact, some airlines order their flight crew to go and check pilots after every half an hour, which is a general, very much, it happens very frequently in all the airlines. So these things keep on happening, so that while one pilot is taking control rest, other pilot is in control of the aircraft. In fact, there are designated spaces in, we can say that in an aircraft where these pilots can go and take a nap, which is allowed. So this keeps on happening, but many times if that doesn't happen, there's a big problem.
Right, I'm told Air Marshal P.S. Ahluwalia is back with us. Sir, my question to you was this: if controlled rest is part of the guidelines and safety procedures that airlines follow internationally, what is it that these pilots were doing wrong or differently, which has bothered the DGCA?
Just to get the record straight, I think there are very few countries in the world that permit something like this controlled sleep or controlled rest, as you might wish to call it. Even the American Airline Pilots Association has rejected it, which is the biggest in the world. And this was actually in the form of a civil aviation rules issued by the DGCA some time ago. Obviously, it was under the pressure of the local airlines, and they were under the pressure of the pilot unions. This is absolutely uncalled for. There should be no reason to be having this controlled rest. And for your information, the car says 15 minutes rest, but it doesn't specify 15 minutes in how much time. So there are too many loopholes in something like this, and I think it should be totally abolished. There is no reason for anybody to be having controlled rest in a flight of 8 to 10 hours, because that's within the duty flight time limitations. And that is one aspect of it. The second aspect is that there is no reason whatsoever for anybody not to be in communication with the ground station. This is dangerous. It's against all flight safety rules. And this can happen, number one, if your volume, just like I've been trying to get the volume through to you, if I adjust the volume and put it minimal, I won't be able to hear you. And that is what possibly is being done by pilots, because they don't want to hear the additional RT-neta. So they put it to minimum volume, and if the other guy is having a so-called rest and the other pilot has got it off, that means you will have no communication. Now, in a country in Europe, where the countries are very close together and you're transiting from one country to another, the entry point and the exit point, you have to be monitored by the ground station in terms of their own security, in terms of them wanting to change, shall we say, the airway, give you a deviation for your route, and very importantly, give you any positive vertical separation. That means change your altitude if there is any oncoming traffic or any such thing. So therefore, look at the kind of problems you have created by not following the rules. If you might remember that on many occasions, the last time the Malaysian Airlines was shot down over Ukraine.
Right.
Things like that can happen. There was the Korean Airlines in the Far East, where the Russians had shot them down because there was no communication, and if there was, they were not following the instructions that were being given. So every country has a sovereign right, every sovereign country has a right to protect its own air defense space, which is over its own territory. So it becomes very crucial from the flight safety point, from the security point, to be in communication with some channel or the other of the country that you're transiting over.
Right. You both are experts in your field so you understand how this works better. But from a layperson's perspective, I can tell you, if I'm on a flight and if someone were to tell me that my pilot is taking a nap, I'd be very, very worried, Sumit. And as Air Marshal Ahluwalia mentioned, these are duty hours, the 8 to 10 hour flights or the longer flights they take. They're technically on duty. You and I do not take naps when we are at work. So why are pilots being allowed to do this is point A. And B, at a time when these worries are being expressed, it's not just the passengers, the pilots are risking their lives as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And DGCA might do well to review these kind of instructions. And like I'm telling you specifically, I don't know of any other country that is giving this kind of a phraseology called controlled sleep.
So, Sumit, why is this being allowed in India? Are pilots overworked? Or as Air Marshal Ahluwalia mentioned, the DGCA is under pressure from pilots union. You have only so many pilots and you have to bow to their demands.
Well, Palki, earlier it was not allowed, but in May 2013, the pilots guild or the pilots, they came together and then they requested DGCA to allow them, because this is something which is good for pilots. That's what they said at that point of time. And then DGCA aviation regulator, he allowed the pilots to go for this controlled rest and taking sleep. So this was not a practice which was followed in India earlier, but later on it was followed. But yes, I would say that because in India, not many airlines, they go abroad and fly abroad. They generally don't go abroad. Only Jet Airways and Air India are having long haul flights. So that's why this could have been avoided. But yes, in May 2013, it was finally allowed because the pilots went to DGCA and then pressurized him to allow them to take rest. Well, I must point out a study by NASA in 1992 on the basis of which the controlled rest was allowed. The 1992 NASA study concluded that a pilot would be more alert for the approach phase of a flight if he or she rested 45 or less minutes during the pre-descent part of the flight. So after that, throughout the world, the precedents came, and then the countries started giving their pilots controlled rest. Now, India is now among the countries where controlled rest is allowed, but sometimes it is not possible to follow that duration or the control duration of the time when you are allowed rest, and you go sometimes you go overboard, and that's when incidents like these happen.
And how do you monitor for how long a pilot was asleep? And you keep mentioning the long distance flights that Indian Airlines for one fly, but I want to tell our viewers that it's happened in shorter flights as well. An investigation report, in fact, in the Air India plane crash that landed in Mangalore in 2010, killing 158 people, found that its Serbian captain was asleep for more than half of the 3-hour flight. It was just a 3-hour long flight, and he slept for half of that duration from Dubai, and he was quote-unquote disoriented when he attempted to land the plane, which is why it crash landed. In 2008, an Air India Jaipur-Mumbai flight flew well past its destination with both its pilots fatigued and fast asleep in the cockpit. When the pilots were finally woken up by anxious Mumbai air traffic controllers, the plane was about halfway to Goa. In 2013, 2 Air India pilots put their lives and the lives of 166 passengers on a Bangkok-Delhi flight at risk by taking a 40-minute break from the cockpit and getting 2 flight attendants to operate the plane in their absence. So these are very, very serious issues, Sumit. And do we expect the DGCA in the review meeting that it has called to address them very effectively and say that this is the red line that pilots or airlines are not going to be allowed to cross?
That's what is being told to us by our sources, that DGCA is of the view that any suspicious that pilots now under the garb of taking controlled rest are taking rest more than allowed. This is not allowed in any circumstances. And the recent incidents when these 2 Air India aircraft and Jet Airways aircraft were scrambled and were escorted by fighter jets, these incidents are of very serious nature. Well, ultimately, the scrambling of fighter jets and these things have become a very, very, a last resort kind of thing, especially after, you must be remembering, in 2001, a 9/11 incident, we all know about that, when the aircraft were used as missiles, and we all know about that historical thing, so historical incident. So thereafter, the aircraft were seen as a possible threat which can be used by terrorists. So no country would like to take a chance with aircraft nowadays. Earlier, aircraft were seen as the only means of going from here to there or from point A to point B. But 9/11 changed the perception of aviation industry completely. Well, the aircraft were used in that horrific terrorist attacks to bring down the two iconic World Trade Center towers. So after that, the whole aviation industry changed the way they were seeing the aircraft.
Right.
One particular incident is that after the 9/11, there was demand of aircraft which were shorter in size, and they would be carrying less fuel.
Right.
So this was one of the demands, and clearly nowadays when aircraft are going from point A to point B, there is a threat perception. That's why the fighters are sent to escort them.
Air Marshal Ahluwalia, I understand you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, you know, I think we're confusing the whole issue. It's very simple. They shouldn't be sleeping. They should be fit to go through their entire flight of 8 or 10 hours as per the duty flight time limitation. I don't see them having any reason for having any kind of rest, because if you're not fit to be flying, you shouldn't be in the cockpit, number one. Number two, this 15 minutes has no latitude. In other words, it does not say when you start and when you stop this rest. And you could do it 10 times in the flight. There is no restriction. I think the DGCA very seriously has to overcome this CAR, review it, and change it. Because in the air, there is no margin of error. If any errors are created, then it can lead to fatalities. And fatalities for any airline in the world is not acceptable. So I think there's a long story of how many things can go wrong by a pilot in the cockpit not keeping his volume right, not changing over to the correct frequency. You know, the number of times you have to change your frequency is very often in a congested country like congested airspace like Europe. So therefore, you have to be alert, you have to be alive. And whoever other gentleman you got over there regarding, you know, the fighters coming up, the fighters will come up. I've been looking after scrambles all my life. And I can tell you that if we have our Air Force pilots sitting with the controllers, civil controllers, and if there's any aircraft that does not respond to RT communication or it deviates from the airspace, like for instance, if an aircraft takes off on runway 27 at Palam Airport and he just goes straight across the Rashtrapati Bhavan, do you think we are going to let him do that? Certainly not.
Right.
And if he does it out of mistake, then I think he's putting at risk all the people who are sitting, all the passengers in the aircraft. So therefore, there is no margin of error. We have to be very strict. We have to follow and adhere to flight safety norms. And I think giving into pressure so that you can sleep 15 minutes. I don't understand 15 minutes, you know, this power nap or something that you might wish to call it. I don't know whether it's effective or not, no matter what the doctors tell you. But I think in 15 minutes, by the time you go to sleep, by the time you get up, I think it'll take you another 15 minutes to get back to normal. So all this is making no sense to me. DGCA needs to review the CAR and actually throw it out of the window.
Right. Air Marshal Ahluwalia, Sumit Chaturvedi, I'm going to request you both to stay with us. As we head into a break, I want to say this, that these are technical issues, these are matters of procedure and guidelines and rules, but eventually these are issues that affect lives. What are your rights? What can you do? What is a passenger's recourse who pays thousands of rupees to buy these air tickets? Can you demand accountability from the airlines? What are your options? That's something that we will discuss on the other side of this very short break. Do stay with us.